In this video, I want to handle a couple things at the same time. What I want to handle is the roughness, metallic, and ambient occlusion all at once. And you might be asking yourselves, well, why not just make a parameter for each? Why don't we just, hold down the one key and make a one scalar and plug it in metallic and inside of roughness? And we could do this. This would allow us to convert these to parameters and have control over these. But again, if you've been following along, just like base color, we want to have a little bit of flexibility about how we set up our different attributes that we can have either a texture or specific values. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to do the same exact thing as we did before. We're going to take our base color, we're going to make a texture sampler. And again, I'm going to make sure that it has a texture assigned to it or else it will get mad at us. So I'm just going to type in default texture just to get an Unreal Engine resource. So, and if you don't have that available, any texture will do because it'll be able to be swapped out. We're going to need to, again, right click on that node and convert it to a parameter. And once we've done that, we can name this to ORM. And just to take a pause about why we're going to set that, we want this to represent the occlusion, so ambient occlusion, the roughness, that's the R, and the metallic. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use the three different channels, R, G, and B, and we're going to do some what's called channel packing. And if that's the first thing you've ever noticed, you will understand that each one of these channels is grayscale, and that information we don't need full color for any one of those particular output pins. So once we've decided that we want to use an ORM packed texture, which you can look up how to necessarily create outside of Unreal, this would allow you to bring one in. But let's say that we don't have a packed texture that can control our roughness, metallic, and ambient occlusion. What we can do is the same thing as before. We can actually use a constant 3 vector. So if we do constant 3 from our searching here, and this time, again, I'm going to right click and I'm going to convert it to a parameter. And I'm going to name it as well, ORM. And by default, we can think of this as having the ability for us to set the R, the G, and the B value right here. So again, in terms of the occlusion, one would be pure white, and that is totally fine for what we need because we don't have any kind of occlusion or dark areas by default. So we're just going to plug that in. Now in terms of roughness, if we use the R value coming out, the R value is for occlusion. The green value is for roughness. The main reason we do this is that the green channel actually has a bit more information available in terms of depth of the pixels. So we can actually get wider ranges. But let's say we put a value of 0.5 in here to kind of give it a medium roughness. Again, remember 0 is super smooth and 1 is very, very, very rough. And in terms of metallic, I don't want it to be metallic at first. So the blue channel can get plugged in and not have any kind of metallic. So at this point, we have the same dilemma. We can understand how the different channels can be hooked up to the outputs, but we don't want to actually do that. So what are we going to do? Well, we'll do the same thing. We'll have another static parameter switch. So right click, static switch parameter. And I'm going to name this has ORM ? So again, occlusion, roughness, metallic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug into the true, the RGB of both of these. And what that's going to allow me to do is to say, if it has it, use this texture. If not, use these three values. Now, the hard part is, if I alt-click and left on all these down here, how will I take a single pin and plug it into 3 different spots? It doesn't seem possible. Well, what we can do is we can use a node called split components. Split components. And what this allows us to do is to take a node that has multiple values, RGB, and to pull out specifically what's being fed. So depending if it's the texture, feed out those, and if it's this color, feed out those. So again, R is for ambient, the G goes to the roughness, and again, the M goes to metallic. And from here, again, we have now set up our high level ability to control not only the ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic, but also if we don't have a map, we can just control it with these values. So I'm going to drag a box around this and hit the C key. And we're going to name this ORM to be organized. And once again, we want to make sure that these nodes are also organized. So if I click on one of these, go to group, I'm going to type in ORM. And on the rest of them, I can just hold down control and click on them, or I can come in here and go to group, set it to ORM, click on the pin, set to ORM. And on the split component, it doesn't really matter because it's not a value we're going to change. So at this point now, we can apply and save. And in the previous video, if you've been following along, we made a material instance of this master material we've been working on. And we did that by coming into the master material, right-clicking, and creating a material instance. Once we open that instance up, we can now see all the parameters that we've exposed. And now we have has ORM. And if I wanted to say necessarily to apply this like to the chair, it now has the color here. We could come in and make it necessarily shiny. So we can go to the ORM, take this, and again, the blue channel is the metallic. We could set this to 1, and now our chair is 100% metallic. Or I could make it very shiny. I could basically make a kind of chromed plastic chair with what we had. And this gives us a lot of flexibility because sometimes you can get away with this. It might not be perfect, but in some cases you just need variation. And this allows you to, again, choose. We can choose between if it has a texture or not. And again, I can go to the ORM texture, enable it with the little icon here, and then scan to find the asset that I've made outside. So I have this occlusion roughness metallic texture I made in Substance Designer. And once we apply that, now these images, let me pull this over here. This is the packed information. So again, R is the ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic values for this texture, and that is how we drive all 3 of those values with a single value, and again, give us the flexibility to decide if we want to use a texture or if we just want to use specific scalar values. So hopefully that makes sense, and I'll see you guys in the next one.